Sitting at Grain SA today, I'm with Dr. Marinda Visser, and your title says Industry Services here. What does industry services really mean in terms of your description here?
Good morning, Tony. It's a very misleading name, if I can say it that, because we do so much as a division within Grain SA. Our primary mandate, I would say, is to make sure that grain farmers, and we're looking at 7 different grain commodities, has, in terms of market information, inputs information, the research and development, we make sure that farmers stay sustainable and profitable in the long term. So we look after the business of grain farmers on a daily business.
Where do the bugs and the worms come in?
Under the research and development, that's one of my primary roles as a researcher, a past researcher, and with that background, I make sure that we manage research and that we make sure that research is driven with our partners, which is both public and private institutions. We make sure research is needs driven and research is there to address farmer constraints, both on the developing side as well as commercial farmers.
You just mentioned your qualifications, and the one thing is I see the doctor in front. What exactly are you a doctor of in explanation?
Okay. I'm a plant pathologist by training. Plant pathologist studies, in my particular case, diseases of agriculturally economically important crops. That's what I focused on.
What about synthetically generated crops? How do you feel about those?
You're talking genetically modified?
Yes.
Tony, I think, and I'm going to go here with the World Health Organization, there's no proof in the world that shows that crops that produced using biotechnology like GM, because it's just a tool. It's a biotechnology tool that's used to enhance either disease resistance or make a crop stronger. And there's no proof that foods produced using this technology through seeds or conventional foods, the one is not more safer than the other one.
So why all the fuss?
Because people look at emotionals. It's emotions involved here. People don't look at the science in front of them. There's no evidence that suggests that biotechnology and here GMs is any way going to cause health hazards or anything. And in South Africa, we can pride ourselves. We've got the most fantastic legislation that was put in place to make sure that GMOs are very, very strictly regulated. We have technically sound GMO council that makes sure that every application is thoroughly screened, so nothing can enter this country if it hasn't got approval.
Let's move on to the kind of creepy crawlies and bugs and insects that we have. What kind of things must we be aware of? And I'm going to just bring in here, I read recently of giant worms, and I thought this was a bit of a joke when I read it, until I read they were destroying crops.
It depends which commodities we're looking at. We know the past season we have had very big outbreaks of armyworms.
Is that what a giant worm is, an armyworm?
It's armyworms, particularly on maize, and it caused a lot of devastation in parts of Northwest and the Free State. But then there's other pests that was just a bigger problem within maize in particular, and it's rodents that's eating away at our national food security.
Rats?
And rats, yes. A
Field
specific
rats.
kind of rat, yes. They are destroying our maize crop, and these are the sort of pests we want the Department of Agriculture to update our national list or database for pests so that we can include these problems, because if it's not on a legislative, if it's not within a regulation, then they cannot go out and manage the problem. And there's where we're sitting. A lot of our smaller farmers that farms on 50 hectares under maize, if you can imagine those rodents entering a 50-hectare field overnight, by the next morning nothing will remain of the crop.
But this is ridiculous. So rats, I've got to get my head around this one.
Yes.
Rats can run wild over a farm and eat up thousands of tons of food in what we need is food security now.
What we need is food security.
But what's being done about it?
Tony, we are addressing these problems, and we have, within the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishery, there's several officials, and there's a Directorate Land Use and Soil Management, where there's a piece of legislation that looks at problems, problem birds, problem pests within agriculture. The quelea bird is written into that, so they manage that and control it, and we have fantastic work with them, and they do their job fantastic. However, doves is not written within that legislation.
Nor rats.
Nor are rats, so you cannot do a thing about it. You need a management plan within agriculture, within that the particular unit within agriculture, that will look and add the list and expand that list that says, yes, doves are a problem in sunflower producing areas. Pigeons, doves are problems. They're eating away at our sunflowers. We are a net importer of sunflower oil. We can produce more, but because of this problem, farmers go out. They do not want to produce sunflowers anymore. All we need is to amend a regulation, and an official can do it in his office, and it's as easy as that. But that doesn't get done. Just change the regulation, include it. Say these are problem birds, the rodents, we need to manage this. Off you go and manage it.
Let's go to the food preservation talk, and let's look at the population of the world as it was in 1935. And since then today, it has doubled. It's about 7 billion as we stand today. By the year 2040, it will be 14 billion. Now, that includes South Africa. We have to be self-sufficient on food as much as we can. What are we really doing towards that?
Tony, again, within the grain crops and where we're seeing it, we need to produce more on less. So it's not like the natural resources available to us is increasing. No, it stays stagnant, it's the same. And our natural resource base is getting poorer and poorer because we need to look after what we have. So it's to produce more on the same amount of land, and it's limited in South Africa as we speak. And we've got certain parts in South Africa where we can produce grains and produce it successfully. So we need to work on that and expand high potential land. There's huge factors like mining, the influence of mining, particularly in Mpumalanga, on high potential agricultural land. But coming back to the research and development part again, one of our biggest constraints is if we don't put enough funds, public funds, into research and development, looking at new technologies, looking at better ways to do more on the same piece of land. If we don't invest there, then I don't see how we're going to be self-sufficient anytime soon. And yes, our population is growing, the needs is increasing, food's becoming more expensive. One particular problem we are facing is, again, besides the pest problem, there's a disease problem. There is so many fungal and bacterial diseases affecting grain crops that needs urgent attention. But because of limited public funding and even private funding, a lot of work cannot be done. We don't have breeding programs on most of our grain crops anymore. It's all in private hands, which is good. But you still need investment. There could be public-private partnerships between private breeders and public institutions to ensure that at least in terms of wheat, we don't want to be self-sufficient because we know we import a lot of wheat. However, we want to produce a certain percentage of our own wheat, like for instance 85% self-sufficient. We're not that there. We would love to be there. And then 15% can be imported, because that's important for the wheat farmers in the Western Cape and elsewhere.
Okay, do you see, and just to wind this up, as a doctor here involved with some of the subjects we've covered today, which are quite frightening, do you see movement on negotiation between the private enterprise, the commercial side and government?
Oh, definitely. I'm very positive on this front, I must say. There's a lot of I deal with a lot of private seed companies, and everyone is very optimistic. Everyone wants to work together. I just don't think people get to the tables to do that. Everybody talks, I want to do this, we need that. But nobody comes together. It's like we need some inspiration to get these different parties, public and private, together around these tables to make sure that what we invest and what we plan, and to a large extent, I think what government wants and what private industry wants is pretty much the same thing. Everybody wants to be profitable. Everybody wants to be sustainable.
They just don't
Government
talk the
wants
same
national
language.
food security. I just think it's just talking past each other.